Welcome to today's deep dive. You know, um, if a massive suspension bridge suddenly collapses in the middle of the day, it makes international news, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Yeah, we demand immediate investigations. We want structural engineers on TV explaining the sheared bolts, and we want to know exactly who is responsible.
People want accountability immediately.
Right, because as humans,
Right.
we're hardwired to react to certain catastrophic failure. But if the steel on that exact same bridge just slowly rusts over the course of 20 years,
Nobody really pays attention.
exactly. Nobody pays attention. We just drive right over it every single day, completely ignoring the invisible erosion until it's far too late.
It's just part of the scenery.
Yeah. And today we're dissecting a fascinating concept from a source text that argues this is exactly how systemic corruption works. We're looking at what happens to a society when the pursuit of profit slowly, almost imperceptibly, outranks human life.
It's such a compelling premise.
It really is. But before we get into it, I do need to explicitly state something right up front.
Yeah, good call.
This deep dive touches on some heavy critiques of economic structures, human behavior, and even religious narratives. So I want to emphasize to you, the listener, that neither of us is taking a political or ideological side here.
Right. We're not here to bash capitalism or, endorse a specific economic model or preach any kind of ideology to you.
We are strictly here to impartially unpack the fascinating arguments and ideas exactly as they're presented in the source text.
We're just exploring the mechanics of how environments shape human behavior, the architecture of incentives, really, and how those incentives can literally rewire our brains.
Giving you the info so you can draw your own conclusions.
Exactly. And the core question from the source material is just a massive hook. Like, can a civilization remain truly humane if profit consistently outranks human well-being?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source claims that moral decline doesn't happen overnight, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The slow rusting of the bridge is a perfect analogy. It doesn't start with some cartoon villain pressing a red button to destroy the world. It starts with the smallest, most easily justified compromises in our daily workplaces. It starts with, like, a small lie, a tiny shortcut, or just telling yourself, well, I must survive.
Or, this is just how everyone does business.
Exactly.
I always picture like a game of moral Jenga. You're looking at the tower, and you pull out one tiny block from the bottom. I can actually give you a personal example of this.
Oh, really? Let's hear it.
Yeah, years ago at an old job, I was way behind on a project. And instead of just admitting I messed up my time management, I told my manager that I was waiting on an email from a client.
An email you hadn't even asked for yet.
Oh, I totally hadn't asked for it. I completely made it up. It was just a tiny white lie just to save face and avoid getting yelled at.
Huh.
So I pulled the Jenga block out, I held my breath,
And the tower didn't fall.
the tower didn't fall, the company didn't collapse, I didn't get fired.
Yeah.
So my brain immediately logged that data and said, oh, I guess it's perfectly safe to pull out another block tomorrow.
And that right there is the biological mechanism of escalation. Because your tower didn't fall from that small white lie, your internal threshold for what constitutes a safe risk fundamentally shifted.
A baseline just completely moved.
Yeah, the baseline moved. Now, apply that same psychological shift to a corporate environment where money is on the line. The stakes get higher, but the psychological justification is the exact same.
And the source uses some wild historical examples to back this up, right?
It does. You see this historically with food adulteration. When the primary goal shifts from nourishing people to maximizing margins, the first step isn't poisoning the customer.
Right, they don't want to kill their buyers.
No, the first step is just replacing a small percentage of a high-quality ingredient with a cheaper filler.
Like the swill milk scandal in the 1850s.
Yes.
That is one of the most horrifying examples in the text. Dairies in New York figured out they could save a absolute fortune by keeping cows right next to whiskey distilleries and feeding them the hot, leftover grain mash.
Which is awful for the animals.
It was basically garbage. The cows got so sick, their teeth literally rotted out, and they produced this incredibly thin, bluish milk.
So to fix it, to make it look like normal milk again, the dairy owners mixed in chalk and starch.
And sometimes plaster of Paris. I mean, they sacrificed basic human safety, which tragically resulted in thousands of infant deaths, just to protect a profit margin.
But again, it didn't start with murder. It started with finding a cheaper feed. That is a brutal but perfect illustration of the escalating Jenga tower. Once a baseline of compromise is established, the descent accelerates.
And you can map that exact same trajectory onto the modern medical field, according to the
Oh,
text.
absolutely. Think about the dynamic where healthcare clinics are run by private equity firms. The core function of medicine is healing, right?
Right, taking care of the patient.
But when the overarching environment demands a 20% year-over-year return, the Jenga blocks start getting pulled. Suddenly, you have quotas for MRI machines.
Wait, quotas? Like they have to do a certain number of scans?
Yes. Patients are being overprescribed medications or pushed into unnecessary, expensive diagnostic tests, not because their biology requires it, but because the clinic has to amortize the cost of the equipment.
It totally hollows out the core function of the service.
Yeah.
You aren't a patient anymore, you're just a revenue stream.
Exactly.
And we see this in consumer goods, too, in the source materials, like the Phoebus cartel in the 1920s. You had all these major light bulb manufacturers coming together, and they realized their products were lasting too long.
Which is a terrible business model for them.
Right. A light bulb that lasts for 20 years is a disaster if you rely on repeat customers. So they literally engineered the light bulbs to burn out faster. They instituted planned obsolescence.
Just designing products merely to look attractive or function for a short time rather than to last. The entire purpose of providing a reliable good was hollowed out and replaced by the sheer extraction of profit.
Truth ultimately becomes marketing, and quality just becomes a liability. But if the Jenga tower is leaning this heavily, if our food is degraded and tests are pushed for profit, why doesn't society panic? Why do we just accept this?
What's fascinating here is the biology behind it. The text introduces the neuroscience of all this. Our lack of outrage isn't some sudden collective moral failure. It comes down to a slow neural adaptation.
So it's an actual physiological process.
Yes, happening in our brains, largely driven by the mirror neuron system. Mirror neurons are a specific class of brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you witness someone else perform that exact same action.
Oh, wow. So they're like the biological foundation of how humans learn.
Exactly. They're how we imitate, how we develop empathy. They are constantly scanning the environment and taking notes.
Constantly updating what's normal.
Right. So if you walk into your office and you see a colleague fudge the numbers on an earnings report, and a week later that same colleague gets a massive bonus and a promotion, your mirror neurons are absorbing a very clear lesson.
They're logging the fact that corruption is rewarded.
They're logging that the environment demands this behavior for survival. And this introduces a critical psychological concept, which is cognitive dissonance.
That's the discomfort you feel when things don't align. Right?
Yes, it's the severe mental discomfort we feel when our beliefs don't match our actions or when we see a fundamental misalignment in our environment. And the human brain absolutely hates cognitive dissonance.
It wants to get rid of it as fast as possible.
It treats it like the body treats a fever. It wants to cool it down immediately. Fighting against a corrupt environment, being the lone whistleblower, or maintaining outrage is biologically exhausting.
It requires massive amounts of social and emotional energy.
Exactly. So to conserve energy and reduce that friction, the highly neuroplastic brain simply rewires itself. When we see dishonesty go unpunished, our subconscious mind absorbs the lesson that this is acceptable. Repeated exposure literally rewrites our social scripts until the outrageous becomes ordinary.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the text focuses heavily on the impact on children here, the blank slate theory.
Yes, this is crucial.
Because no child is born expecting the world to be corrupt. A 5-year-old playing with blocks doesn't dream of growing up to defraud investors. But wait, I have to push back here for a second, just for clarification.
Sure, go ahead.
So the text is arguing that kids don't just organically lose their innocence, but that they are actively trained by watching the adults around them say, well, this is just how the world works. Isn't this biological argument just a massive cop-out?
How do you mean?
Like, are we saying humans are just meat robots at the mercy of our mirror neurons? If my boss lies and I choose to lie, that is still my conscious choice. Doesn't this let people off the hook entirely?
That is a very fair critique, and it's a trap we have to avoid falling into. No, understanding the neuroscience does not absolve the individual of responsibility. You still make the choice.
Yep.
What the neuroscience does is explain the invisible gravity in the room. It explains the current you are swimming against. Recognizing that your brain is actively trying to normalize bad behavior to save energy doesn't excuse the behavior.
It just highlights how hard it is to resist.
Exactly. It highlights how fiercely you have to paddle just to stay morally stationary in a toxic environment. Children learn these behaviors by watching the subtle compromises adults make out of fear, pressure, or greed.
So it's the classic do as I say, not as I do dynamic.
But the brain only internalizes the do. If a child watches their parent lie to a flight attendant to get a cheaper ticket, or watches a boss humiliate a waiter to feel powerful, the child's brain writes a script.
The adult might spend an hour lecturing the kid on honesty, but the child's mirror neurons have already locked in the behavioral truth. Bending the rules gets you the reward.
And this is how a systemic erosion perpetuates itself across generations. The children inherit the rusted bridge, but because they never saw the shiny steel, they assume bridges are just supposed to be brown and flaky.
The outrage is gone before they even reach adulthood. But man, that paints an incredibly bleak picture of humanity. Are we all just biologically destined to become corrupt?
This raises an important question about the individual versus the system. The text points out that millions of honest people, business owners, doctors, teachers, and engineers, they try to do the right thing every day.
So they wake up and actively resist that neural adaptation.
Yes, they fight the gravity, they take the harder path, they refuse the shortcut. So the real villain in the source's core argument isn't human nature. The deeper problem is the system itself.
The architecture that rewards short-term profit over long-term trust.
Precisely. It pressures decent people into making decisions they wouldn't make in a healthy environment. The text uses the example of a bribe.
A bribe is a great example. It rarely starts with someone waking up deciding they want to be a malicious, corrupt actor.
Right. It almost always starts with pressure, which generates fear. Imagine a small business owner who has sunk their life savings into opening a restaurant. The building is done, the staff is hired, but a local inspector says the final permit will be delayed by 8 months unless an expedition fee is paid in cash.
And the owner's livelihood is entirely on the line. If they wait 8 months, they go bankrupt.
Their employees lose their jobs, their family loses their home. The pressure creates an impossible choice. Or look at the pressure of greed and competition. You own a shipping company, and your biggest competitor is winning all the contracts because they're paying kickbacks.
If you refuse to play the game, your honest business gets outcompeted and dies.
Right, you're watching corruption being rewarded. The individual didn't create the game, but the systemic architecture forces them to play it or perish.
So what does this all mean for us? If good people are forced to make bad choices because of systemic pressure, and our brains normalize those choices over time, how does this cycle play out historically?
The text warns that the greatest danger to any civilization isn't the mere existence of corruption. Every society throughout human history has battled corruption. The true danger is becoming so familiar with it that we stop being shocked.
The moment the rest just becomes part of the landscape.
Once the shock is gone, the decline becomes part of everyday life. And this brings up one of the most provocative points in the text, how religion and belief systems have historically reinforced this normalization.
Oh, right. We use cultural myths to protect ourselves from having to fix the bridge. The text mentions phrases like, the poor will always be with you, or it's just human nature.
Yes, you hear those constantly when people talk about corporate monopolies or systemic poverty. It's always delivered with a heavy sigh of resignation.
And that sigh is just the sound of the brain avoiding cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. The source argues these are not eternal truths. They are not biological imperatives. They are comforting stories we tell ourselves to avoid the extreme discomfort of demanding a better system.
Because if poverty and greed are just human nature, then you don't have to feel guilty about not fighting to change it. It's out of your hands.
It acts as a psychological shield. It lets us off the hook and allows us to blame the vague concept of the universe, rather than looking at the very specific man-made incentive structures we have built.
It's an abdication of responsibility disguised as ancient wisdom.
Well said.
But I think it's vital to reiterate here, the ultimate takeaway isn't asking us to hate business or reject money. Exploring how profit motives degrade human values isn't a manifesto against trade.
Absolutely not. Commerce is fundamental to human cooperation. The source challenges us to imagine a system where wealth is still generated, but it never, under any circumstances, outranks human life and well-being.
To synthesize this journey, we see how the pursuit of profit starts with those tiny Jenga block compromises at a desk on a Tuesday.
And how it uses our mirror neurons to rewrite our sense of normal.
Right, it trains the next generation to accept a degraded world, and eventually hides behind systemic excuses to avoid change.
It's a profound cycle to recognize.
It is, which is why I want to challenge you, the listener, directly. Echoing the source's challenge, the first step to changing a system is noticing it.
Right. What have you normalized in your own life?
Exactly. What compromises have you accepted as just the way things are that would have absolutely horrified you as a child? We can't fix the steel until we stop pretending the rust isn't there.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on that question of what is being rewritten right now in your own brain. If our brains are this incredibly neuroplastic, capable of silently adapting to corruption, that biological streak goes both ways.
You can intentionally retrain it upward.
Yes. What specific daily micro habits or disruptions could you practice starting today to intentionally resensitize your brain? If the people around you learn by observation, what radical acts of unrewarded integrity can you model tomorrow to begin rewriting the neural pathways of your environment back toward empathy?
That is a really powerful thought to end on. A little structural repair for the bridge. Start looking for the rust, everyone. Catch you on the next deep dive.